masters, no slaves, no rulers, no state, no taxes, no cage. To see it is to leave it.
Don't panic.
Voluntaryist Academy is an educational platform dedicated to the principles of non-aggression, self-ownership, and the ethical philosophy of voluntarism. Here, we reject the mythology of political authority and embrace the timeless truth that all human interaction should be grounded in consent and moral integrity. Through rigorous study, in-depth courses, and accessible materials, Voluntaryist Academy equips individuals with tools to critically examine the foundations of coercive systems and to replace them with voluntary, peaceful alternatives rooted in natural law. So whether you are new to these ideas or looking to deepen your understanding, Voluntaryist Academy provides a structured path to intellectual freedom, ethical consistency, and personal sovereignty. Welcome. Explore the curriculum, challenge false assumptions, learn to live free. Streaming live every Saturday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm James Cordiner, your host of Voluntaryist Academy, and you can go to my website, voluntaristacademy.com, to learn more and to get in on the action, but more about that later. We are going to continue our dive into the Most Dangerous Superstition by Larken Rose, and we're going to probably have a little bit of a shorter stream this evening. I've got the rest of this series pretty well mapped out, I think, and it's going to take, including tonight, after tonight, 2 more weeks, and then we'll have some fun doing some other things coming up in the not so distant future. Is going to be the 2026 edition of the Independence Day special, running it an annual 4th of July special for there's a hyphen in there, Independence Day. So we're gonna celebrate I don't know, but it's going to be a roundtable discussion featuring some of my friends and some people that have already been interviewed on this channel. And so it's going to be a lot of fun, and it's about a month away, but we're going to gear up and have a blast talking about that, but more about that later, maybe. Until then, let's just dive right in to the material. We covered last week a lot, and this week we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about some of the effects of the myth. So part 3, section C, the effects of the myth on the targets. Proud to be robbed. One of the more bizarre results of the belief in authority is that it causes the victims of government aggression to feel obligated to be victimized, and causes them to feel bad if they avoid being victimized. A prime example is the citizen who proclaims that he is proud to pay his taxes, even if one believes that some of what he surrenders is used to fund useful things like roads or helping the poor, etc. To be proud of having been threatened and coerced into funding such things is still strange. Pride in being a law-abiding taxpayer is not the result of having helped people, which the person could have done far more effectively on a voluntary basis. The pride comes from having faithfully obeyed the commands of a perceived authority. By analogy, a man may feel good about having freely given to someone in need, but he would not take pride in getting robbed by a poor man. Probably the only situation in which anyone brags about having been forced to do something occurs in the context of one who believes he is obligated to obey a perceived authority. Having been trained to view obedience as a virtue, people want to feel good about surrendering what they have earned to government. And so, with the help of political propaganda, they hallucinate their contributions, quote unquote contributions, that they are actually helping society as a whole. They speak as if paying taxes means, quote unquote, giving back to society or, quote, investing in their country, end quote. Such rhetoric, as common as it is logically nonsensical, since it implies that every one of the individuals who make up society and the country somehow each owes a debt to the group as a whole, but is owed nothing. What people are actually doing when they pay taxes is giving money not to society or the country, but to the politicians who make up the ruling class, to spend however they please. The implication, as odd as it is that the people can benefit a whole by every one of the people being robbed individually. The idea that the common good is better served by politicians spending everyone's money than it would be served by each person spending his own money is strange, to say the least. Recently, the lie of taxes serving the common good has become more and more transparent as governments have spent astronomical amounts of money on such things which obviously serve the elite at the expense of society and humanity. This would include perpetual warmongering, direct multi-billion-dollar redistribution schemes benefiting the richest people in the world. We know those as bailouts, and government takeovers of various segments of the economy, like the healthcare industry, among many other things. In fact, there is almost nothing average people could financially support that would be less helpful to society and humanity in general than paying taxes. Whatever things a person views as worthwhile, like schools, roads, defense, helping the poor, etc., he could just as easily support without going through politicians and government. Yet many people specifically express pride for having surrendered the fruits of their labors to their masters, having paid their taxes. Consider how someone would be viewed who proudly proclaimed, quote, "I lied on my tax return, avoiding giving $3,000 to the government and gave the $3,000 to a really good charity instead," end quote. Many people would still condemn such a person for his criminal disloyalty to his masters, even if the person's actions better served humanity than paying his taxes would have. This is because the pride expressed by many people does not come from helping humanity, but from obeying authority. There is little or no chance that anyone would voluntarily contribute his own wealth to every one of the programs and schemes now funded via government. And if he hands over his money only because some law or authority compelled him to, and then expresses pride in having done so, he is in essence boasting about having been forcibly dominated, precisely the way a thoroughly indoctrinated slave might take pride in serving his master well. There is a big difference between feeling good about having voluntarily supported some worthy cause and taking pride in being subjugated. Instead of being offended at the insult and injustice of being coercively controlled and exploited, in fact, instead of even recognizing that as injustice, many victims of government oppression feel profound loyalty to their controllers. Proud to be controlled. If a slave can be convinced that he should be a slave, then his enslavement is both proper and legitimate, that he is the rightful property of his master, and that he has an obligation to produce as much as possible for his master, then he does not need to be physically oppressed. In other words, enslaving the mind makes enslaving the body unnecessary, and that is exactly what the belief in authority does. It teaches people that it is morally virtuous that they surrender their time, effort, and property, as well as their freedom and control over their own lives, to a ruling class. Many people express pride at being law-abiding taxpayers, which means only that they do what the politicians tell them to do. And they give the politicians money. When confronted with the idea that it is wrong for them to be forcibly deprived of the fruits of their labor, even if it is done quote-unquote legally, such people often vehemently defend those who continue to rob them, insisting that such robbery is essential to human civilization. Of course, they do not use the term robbery to describe the situation, though they are well aware of what would be done to them if they refused to pay. Likewise, when one person objects to the level of taxation or other forcible control being inflicted upon him by those in government, others who are also being oppressed will often condemn the one who is objecting, telling him that if he does not like how he is being treated, he should leave the country. Maligning a fellow victim. That's what they're doing. Maligning a fellow victim of coercion for complaining about it is a sure sign that a person actually takes pride in his own enslavement. I just want to remind everybody that this PDF is full of typos and errors. I'm doing my best here. So if you're watching, there's actually a period after victim. It threw me off. Maybe I should just read that one for the final cut. We're doing this live, but there will be a super cut. Maligning a fellow victim of coercion for complaining about it is a sure sign that a person actually takes pride in his own enslavement. Frederick Douglass, a former slave, witnessed and described that exact phenomenon among his fellow slaves, many of whom were proud of how hard they worked for their masters and how faithfully they did as they were told. From their perspective, a runaway slave was a shameful thief, having stolen himself from the master. Douglass described how thoroughly indoctrinated many slaves were, to the point where they truly believed that their own enslavement was just and righteous. I have found that to make a contented... So Douglass said, I have found that to make a contented slave, it is necessary to make a thoughtless one. It is necessary to darken his moral and mental vision, and, as far as possible, to annihilate the power of reason. He must be able to detect no inconsistencies in slavery. He must be made to feel that slavery is right, and he can be brought to that only when he ceases to be a man. End quote. Though slavery is no longer practiced openly, the mentality of loyal subservience remains. Most people today detect no inconsistencies in allowing a ruling class to forcibly extort and control everyone else, and in fact feel that such extortion and oppression is right, to the point where many feel actual shame if they are caught keeping what they earn and running their own lives. It is one thing to feel shame at having been caught stealing or defrauding or committing aggression, but it is quite another for someone to feel shame about having done something which, if not for politician decrees, or they're known as laws, he would have seen as perfectly permissible. Such shame does not come from the immorality of the act itself. It comes only from the imagined immorality of disobeying authority, i.e., breaking the law. When, for example, the average citizen is caught cheating on his taxes, or not having a registration sticker on his car, or smoking marijuana, or doing any of 1,000 other things which do not constitute aggression against anyone else, but which have nonetheless been declared illegal by the ruling class, there is usually some feeling of guilt in the person's own mind. Without a feeling of being obligated to obey, being caught and punished by agents of government would be regarded in the same way that being bitten by a dog would be regarded, as an unpleasant consequence to be avoided, but having no moral element to it at all. Instead, most people feel, at least to some extent, that being caught committing a victimless crime indicates some sort of moral failing in themselves, because they did not do as they were told. The desire to have the approval of authority is extremely powerful in almost everybody, to a degree they themselves do not even realize. The ubiquitous message of authoritarianism has a physiological impact far deeper than most people imagine, as the Milgram experiments demonstrated. Nearly everyone experiences dramatic emotional stress and discomfort any time he comes into conflict with authority, and will go to great lengths, no matter what acts of evil he must commit, in order to earn the approval of his masters. Even the terminology people use illustrates how effectively they have been trained to feel morally obligated to obey authority. This can be seen in such simple phrases as, "You're not allowed to do that," or even, "You can't do that," when referring to some behavior that has been declared illegal by the ruling class. Such phrases do not simply express a potential adverse consequence, but also imply that, because some act has been forbidden by the masters, committing that act is bad, not allowable, or even impossible. Such as stating, "You can't do that." Looking at the statistical facts demonstrates the power of the belief in authority. In the United States, about 100,000 IRS employees extort about 200 million victims. Those being robbed outnumber the robbers by about 2,000 to 1. This book was written 15 years ago or something, 16 years ago. This could never be accomplished by brute force alone. It continues only because most of those being robbed feel a duty to be robbed, and imagine such robberies to be legitimate and valid. The same is true of many other laws, which are generally obeyed even though the enforcers are always hugely outnumbered by those they seek to control. The high levels of compliance do not come so much from a fear of punishment as from being the feeling among those being controlled that they have a moral obligation to cooperate with their own subjugation. The good funding the evil. Even if an individual is never personally victimized by law enforcement, never has a run-in with the police, and sees little if any direct impact by government upon his day-to-day life, the myth of authority still has a dramatic impact, not only on his own life, but also on how his existence affects the world around him. For example, the millions of compliant subjects who feel an obligation to surrender a portion of what they earn to the state to pay their fair share of taxes continually fund all manner of endeavors and activities which those people would not otherwise fund, which almost no one would otherwise fund, and which therefore would not otherwise exist. By way of taxes, those claiming to be government confiscate an almost incomprehensible amount of time and effort from millions of victims and convert it into fuel for the agenda of the ruling class. Millions of people who oppose war are compelled to fund it via taxation. The product of their time and effort is used to make possible something they morally oppose. The same is true of state-controlled wealth redistribution programs, like welfare, and Ponzi schemes, like Social Security, the so-called war on drugs, and so on. Most of the programs of government would not exist if not for the belief among the general population in a moral obligation to pay one's taxes. Even government programs purported to have noble goals, such as protecting the public and helping the poor, become bloated, inefficient, and corrupt monstrosities, which almost no one would willingly support if there was no law requiring them to do so. In addition to the waste, corruption, and destructive things which government does with the wealth it confiscates, there is also the less obvious issue of what the people would have done with their money otherwise. As government takes the wealth of the producers to serve its own purposes, it also deprives the producers of the ability to further their own goals. Someone who surrenders $1,000 in taxes to the ruling class may not only be funding a war he morally opposes, but he is also being deprived of the ability to put $1,000 into savings, or donate $1,000 to some charity he considers worthwhile, or pay someone $1,000 to do some landscaping work. So the damage done by the myth of authority is twofold. It forces people to fund things they do not believe are good for themselves or society, while simultaneously preventing them from funding things that they do view as worthwhile. In other words, subservience to the authority causes people to act in a manner which is to one extent or another directly opposed to their own priorities and values. Even the people who imagine that their tax dollars are doing good by building roads, helping the poor, paying for police, and so on, would almost certainly not fund the government version of those services, at least not to the same degree, if they did not feel compelled by moral obligation and the threat of punishment to do so. Any private charity that had the inefficiency, corruption, and record of abuse that the AFDC, HUD, Medicare, and other government programs have would quickly lose all of its donors. Any private company as expensive, corrupt, and inefficient as government infrastructure programs would lose all of its customers. Any private protection service, which was so often caught abusing, assaulting, and even killing unarmed innocent people, would have no customers. Any private company that claimed to be providing defense, but told its customers it needed $1 billion every week to wage a prolonged war on the other side of the world, would have few, if any, contributors, including among those who now verbally support such military operations. The feeling of obligation to pay taxes seems to be little hampered by the fact that government is notoriously wasteful and inefficient. While millions of taxpayers struggle to make ends meet while paying their fair share of taxes, politicians waste millions on laughably silly projects, studying everything from studying cow farts to building bridges to nowhere, to paying farmers to not grow certain crops, and so on, ad infinitum, and billions more are simply lost, with no accounting of where they went. But much of what people make possible through payments of taxes is not just wasted but is quite destructive to society. The war on drugs is an obvious example. How many people would voluntarily donate to a private organization which had the stated goal of dragging millions of nonviolent individuals away from their friends and families to be put into cages? Even the many Americans who now recognize the war on drugs as a complete failure continue, via taxes, to provide the funding which allows it to continue to destroy literally millions of lives. Even the most vocal critics of the various abuses being perpetrated by the ever-growing police state are often among those making the abuse possible by providing the funding for it. Whether the issue is blatant oppression or corruption or mere bungling bureaucratic inefficiency, everyone can point to at least a few things about the government that they do not meet with his approval. And yet, having been trained to obey authority, he will continue to feel obligated to provide the funding which enables the same bungling, corrupt, oppressive government activities that he criticizes and opposes. Rarely does anyone notice the obvious inherent contradiction in feeling obligated to fund things that he thinks are bad. Of course, people who work for non-authoritarian organizations can also be inefficient or corrupt, but when it comes to light that they are what they are doing, their customers can simply stop funding them. That is the natural correction mechanism in human interaction, but it is completely defeated by the belief in authority. How many people are there who are not currently being forced to fund some government program or activity that they morally oppose? Very few, if any. So why do these people keep funding things which they feel are destructive to society? Because authority tells them to, and because they believe that it is good to obey authority. As a result, they continue to surrender the fruits of their labor to fuel the machine of oppression, a machine which otherwise would not and could not exist. Governments produce no wealth. What they spend, they first must take from someone else. Every government, including the most oppressive regimes in history, has been funded by the payment of taxes by loyal, productive subjects. Thanks to the belief in authority, the wealth created by billions of people will continue to be used, not to serve the values and priorities of the people who worked to produce it, but to serve the agendas of those who, above all else, desire dominion over their fellow man. The Third Reich was made possible by millions of German taxpayers who felt an obligation to pay up. The Soviet Empire was made possible by millions of people who felt an obligation to give to the state whatever it demanded. Those two aforementioned examples were also funded by Wall Street, but I don't think he mentions that in this book. Anyways, Anthony C. Sutton. We'll tell you all about that. Every invading army, every conquering empire has been constructed out of wealth that was taken from productive people. The destroyers have always been funded by the creators. The thieves have always been funded by the producers. Through the belief in authority, the agendas of the evil have always been funded by the efforts of the good. And this will continue unless and until the most dangerous superstition is dismantled. When the producers no longer feel a moral obligation to fund the parasites and usurpers, the destroyers and controllers, tyranny will wither away, having been starved out of existence. Until then, good people will keep supplying the resources which the bad people need in order to carry out their destructive schemes. Digging their own graves. Sadly, the belief in authority even makes people feel obligated to assist in their own enslavement, oppression, and sometimes death. In fact, only a small percentage of the coercion of government is implemented by the enforcers of authority. Most of it is implemented by its victims. The ruling class merely tells people that they are required to do certain things, and most people comply without any actual enforcement taking place. As one impressive example, tens of millions of Americans every year fill out lengthy, confusing forms known as tax returns, essentially extorting themselves. If the victims of the IRS agreed to pay, but only if the government figured out that their alleged tax liabilities, the system would collapse. Every tax return is basically a signed confession, with the victim of the extortion racket not only revealing everything about his finances, essentially interrogating himself, but also even figuring out the amount he will be robbed, so the thieves do not have to. But all the unproductive and unpleasant inconveniences and bureaucratic hassles that people subject themselves to simply because they are told that the law requires it are nothing compared to the more serious symptoms of the belief in authority. Based upon the mythology about duty to country and the laws imposing military conscription, known as the draft, millions of people throughout history have become murderers for the state. Only a small fraction, so-called draft dodgers, ever resisted, and they have usually been despised by their fellow countrymen for being cowards or lacking quote-unquote patriotism. In the case of many laws, it can be difficult to distinguish between people who obey because of a simple fear of punishment and those who obey out of a feeling of moral obligation to bow to the commands of politicians. With military conscription, however, it is easy to tell the difference because compliance is usually far more dangerous than any punishment government threatens against those who refuse to comply. If the choices are to comply and possibly die a gruesome death on some battlefield on the other side of the world, or to disobey and possibly go to prison, it is unlikely that the threat alone is why so many people register and show up for duty when called. In short, the level of compliance with the draft, at least in the past, shows quite clearly that most people would rather commit murder or die than disobey authority. There could hardly be a better indication of just how powerful the superstition of authority is, that thousands upon thousands of otherwise civilized, peaceful human beings will leave home, sometimes travel halfway around the world, to kill or die simply because their respective ruling classes told them to. Every soldier is both an enforcer and a victim of the superstition of authority, whether he volunteered or was drafted. Fighting to defend innocence against aggressors is a noble cause, and is often the intention of those who join the military. But in a hierarchical military regime, the soldier becomes a tool of the machine rather than a responsible individual. Rather than being guided by his own conscience, he is controlled entirely by the orders he receives through the chain of command. and every time his obedience leads him to do something immoral, which is quite often, he not only harms his victims, he also harms himself. After the Vietnam War, as one example, many American soldiers came home with their bodies intact, but with deep psychological problems. How much of the mental damage was a result of witnessing carnage, and how much was the result of personally creating carnage is difficult to say. A prolonged fear of imminent death can, of course, cause serious psychological problems, as can inflicting death upon others. Violent confrontations can be quite stressful, even when the individual feels entirely justified, such as when defending his family from an attacker. But to engage in mortal combat where no one, including the combatants, seems to have any clear idea what the purpose or justification for the conflict is, as occurred in Vietnam, seems to add an additional degree of psychological trauma. As many combat soldiers have attested to, once in the hell of war, any vague but noble cause or justification for the fight is usually forgotten, and all that is left is the desire to stay alive and to help one's friends stay alive, both of which are served much better by going home or by not joining the military in the first place. And yet the number of people who simply walk away is quite small for one simple reason, because it would constitute an act of disobedience to a perceived authority. And the average soldier, though he may have the courage and strength to throw himself into mortal combat, does not have the courage and strength to disobey a perceived authority. As in many cases of authoritarian coercion, the victims of military conscription almost always far outnumber those trying to implement it. Even when people are legally commanded to sacrifice their minds and bodies for the sake of turf wars between tyrants, simple passive disobedience by any significant portion of draftees would make their war machine grind to a halt. What punishment is there to fear that is worse than the result of compliance? The usual result of fighting in war are prolonged terror, physical and mental pain and suffering, dismemberment, or even death. Nonetheless, even after witnessing the horrors of war firsthand, very few people can bring themselves to disobey authority, take off the uniform, and walk away. A testament to the power of the belief in authority is the well-documented, if seldom discussed, fact that the atrocities committed against the German Jews by the Nazis were often carried out with the cooperation and assistance of Jewish police, such as occurred in the Warsaw Ghetto. In their culture, just as in almost every other culture, the people had been so thoroughly convinced that obedience is a virtue that, even though someone new was in charge, they still felt obligated to do as they were told, even if it meant violently oppressing their own kinsmen. But what they may be even more disturbing, but indisputable, is the fact that many millions of people in history have assisted in their own extermination because authority told them to. For example, during the Holocaust, many hundreds of thousands of Jews, on their own power, boarded the cattle cars of the very trains that would take them away to their deaths, without trying to hide, run away, or resist. Why? Because those pretending to be authority told them to. While it was no doubt true that they were not all aware of exactly what lay in store for them at the other end, they still handed themselves into the custody of a machine that obviously meant them harm. There is a certain feeling of comfort and safety that one gets by conforming and obeying. Believing that things are in someone else's hands and having trust that someone else will make things right is a way to avoid responsibility. Authoritarian indoctrination stresses the idea that no matter what happens, if you simply do as you are told and do what everyone else does, everything will be okay and those in charge will reward and protect you. The body counts from one government atrocity after another show how misguided such a belief truly is. Had the victims of legal oppression and murder simply withheld their assistance, even if they did not lift a finger to forcibly resist, the world would be a very different place today. If the Nazis had had to physically carry out each Jew, dead or alive, to the gas chambers or crematoriums, the level of murder would have been dramatically lower. If every slave sold into bondage had refused to work, there would soon have been no slave trade. If the IRS had to calculate the tax due and then directly take it from each taxpayer, there would be no more federal taxation. In short, if the victims of authoritarian extortion, harassment, surveillance, assault, kidnapping, and murder simply stopped assisting in their own oppression, tyranny would crumble. And if the people went a step further and forcibly resisted, tyranny would collapse even more quickly. But resistance, whether passive or violent, requires the people to disobey a perceived authority. And that is something that most people are psychologically incapable of doing. Ultimately, it is the belief in authority among the victims of oppression, even more than the beliefs of the ruling class and their enforcers, which allows tyranny and man's inhumanity to man to continue on such a large scale. The effects on actual criminals. Ironically, in situations where obedience would actually improve human behavior, authority has no effect. Those individuals, for example, whose own consciences do not stop them from robbing or assaulting their neighbors because they do not care about the usual standards of right and wrong, also do not care what authority tells them to do. It is only those who are trying to be good who ever feel compelled to obey authority. The belief in authority is a belief about morality. It is the idea that obedience is morally good. To those who do not care about what is deemed good, the very people whose consciences are not enough to make them behave in a civilized manner, the myth of authority has no effect. To put it another way, only those who do not need to be controlled, i.e., those already trying to live moral lives, feel any obligation to obey the controllers. Meanwhile, those who pose a real threat to peaceful society feel no moral obligation to obey any authority anyway. Generally speaking, all commands from authority, including inherently justifiable commands such as do not steal and do not murder, are always either unnecessary when directed at good people or ineffectual when directed at bad people. It is difficult to imagine any situation in which an individual would otherwise have no qualms about committing theft, assault, or murder, but would feel guilty about violating laws which prohibit such actions. A distinction should be made here between moral obligation and fear of retaliation. A thief who feels no moral obligation to refrain from stealing will also feel no moral obligation to obey laws against stealing. However, if he perceives a threat to his own safety, whether from the police or anyone else, he might be deterred from robbing someone. But that deterrent effect comes entirely from the threat of violence, not from the claimed authority underlying the threat. This means that supposed authority is never what stops actual crimes from happening, and that an effective deterrent system does not require authority at all. This is discussed in further detail below. All right, let's take a short break. Let's just take a second here. Oh, I didn't set up any of my lights. It's like the third week in a row that I didn't set things up entirely correctly. Let's go over to voluntaryistacademy.com. I want to show you guys voluntaryistacademy.com real quick. While we take a quick break, you guys can go and grab a beverage or some sort of, something to help you relax into the stream, and let's turn on the lights. So voluntaryistacademy.com is back up for the last couple of weeks. Finally, sometimes all you got to do is tell the customer service people that, you know what, you're going to go and you're going to try a different hosting service. And what do you know, that SSL certificate is fixed and everything's just right back to normal within hours after weeks of, because I'm not a web guy. I know how to build the website like I did, other than some of the posts, which my friend Volunteer has been helping, and that's so awesome. But anyways, voluntaryistacademy.com. You can sign up to the newsletter. I sent out a newsletter this morning. It was awesome. A lot of nice memes, articles from throughout the week that you want to, or news articles from independent researchers and journalists, that like places like antiwar.com, Unlimited Hangout, and the Art of Liberty Foundation, and all sorts of stuff in the newsletter. Sign up today. You can become a sponsor as well, and for like $3 a month, you can help support this project. You can help it keep going and growing, which is more important at this stage in the game. If you like, subscribe, and make a comment on the video, and do all that stuff, that's really, I'm in growth mode here. Like, I'm excited. I want to be in growth mode. Really. But like, if you want to help make sure that the lights stay on, you can do that as well. I appreciate anything that gets sent my way, but really help me grow, help this channel grow. That's all you really got to do. And you can go over to the resources page and you can get all sorts of PDFs and everything like that. All the stuff that I've, pretty much everything that I've covered on this channel is over here. And so, yeah, that's, I think, just about it that I wanted to promote tonight. But when you sign up for the newsletter, you get a PDF version of the Voluntaryist Creed by Auburn Herbert, the guy who is widely known as the man who coined the term voluntarism some 124 years ago, something like that. Pretty crazy. This philosophy has been, the idea of voluntary human interaction has been around for a very, very long time, longer than the idea of government. And so we have to kind of work our way back to that lifestyle. That's what this channel is all about. That's what I'm promoting here on this channel. And I'm simply here to just communicate information out to the audience out there, about these better ideas and how we can implement them in our own lives without having a strong, understanding of what we're up against and what we can actually practically do in a reasonable manner in our own individual lives to affect change in our surroundings and make the world a little bit better around us. An analogy or a metaphor that I like, I think it's an analogy wrapped up in a metaphor, stuffed inside of enigma. Anyways, I'm sorry. What I like to tell people is think of your life as a rock or a stone being tossed in a nice serene pond. And as it lands in the water, it creates a splash and then a ripple, and the ripples go out and they dissipate eventually, sure, but they are affecting their surroundings. We can't ever be too sure of just exactly how much of our surroundings we are affecting, but we do throughout our daily lives affect our surroundings nonetheless. So what we need to do is go forward with that understanding and be the power of example and not initiate harm against others. But if someone were to initiate harm against you, of course, defend yourself. That's what these principles that I talk about all the time, that's what we stand for here. Do no harm, but take no shit. It's really that simple. And when people come knocking at your door intending to do you harm, well, you got to defend yourself. To what extent? That's what's important for you to understand, is that's your call. I can't tell you what extent. That's your call to make. And so we need to be we definitely in this day and age need to be better to our neighbors, to our friends, our families. And we need to be able to understand that the world is a very fucked up place right now. And we need to spread the good word of natural law and voluntarism. I understand it sounds sort of religious when you say it that way, but this is how the universe really operates. And this is how real peace is achieved and maintained. And so we have to do this. We have to be a good example. We have to resist these tyrannical authoritarian assholes. We have to. We have no other choice anymore. They've left us no choice. So any way in your life that you can peacefully resist, you need to do that. You need to. It's the only way that we're going to ever affect any real change in this world and make it so that the future isn't a dystopian nightmare for the children that have to grow up in that, because their future will happen. That much is determined. The future will happen. What it looks like, that part's determined by our own individual free will decisions that we choose to make on a daily basis. And we have to understand that we are that stone being thrown in that pond, and our actions are the effect of our actions are those ripples. And when they dissipate, when those ripples die out, that means our life has been extinguished some way or another. And I hope everyone dies in their sleep peacefully at the ripe old age of, 100 something or whatever. I don't wish anyone's life to be taken from them before it's necessary, or before they, you get what I'm trying to say. Point is, we can be better. We can make better choices. Free will is a hell of a thing. And those weirdo tyrannical fucks out there, they really want to subvert that free will, and they really want to make it so you can't do anything without being surveilled, without it being your actions being stored on some tape in some data center someplace, and you're just, it's what Minority Report meets, Hunger Games mixed in with Idiocracy. I think that's a nice Venn diagram. And so it's nothing I want my children growing up in. And if you don't have children, that's okay. I'm not here to tell you should have children, but understand that we as adults and the ones that are affecting change right here in the now, we kind of have, I consider us to have a little bit of a moral obligation to make sure that the future is full of peace, and that the future can be something that those future generations can also enjoy freedom and liberty. Hyacinth Boyson, and I'll get back to the material in a second. Hyacinth Boyson once said that blessed are those who plant trees under whose shade they will never sit. And so that's the mentality that we need to have, and we need to act now, but with the hope that the future can be better, so that slavery and those who are trying to implement slavery, they don't win. They can't win. They're trying to, but those who understand this, we can actually do something about it. It starts with our voices, and it starts with making sure that that we're better to each other, and that we don't let their divisive tactics and their stupid propaganda and all that shit take over what's in between your ears, and you understand what's real and what's actually worthwhile, which is voluntary, peaceful interactions with your fellow people, and a repudiation of all of the slavery and all. It makes me sad talking about it like this, but we got to do something, All right. Anyways, voluntaristacademy.com. Thanks for listening to my rant. We should get back into, and if you want to get into the supercut later and avoid all these rants, you can just listen to the book, really, and we'll get back here. Where are we at? Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I'll check the chat. Throw in some messages in the chat. I'll check the chat after I'm done reading, probably in about like another 30 minutes or so. All right. Let's go. Part 3, Section D. The effects of the myth on the spectators. The sin of non-resistance. It is obvious that the belief in authority affects the perceptions and the actions of law enforcers, and also affects the perceptions and actions of those against whom the laws are enforced. But even the perceptions and actions of the onlookers, those who are not directly involved, also play a huge role in determining the state of human society. More specifically, the inaction of spectators, who quietly allow legal coercion to be inflicted upon others, has an enormous impact. History is full of examples proving that what Edmund Burke was right when he said that all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. The mass murder committed by the regimes of Stalin, Mao, Hitler, and many others was made possible not just by the willingness of the enforcers to carry out their orders, but also by their victims' imagined obligation to obey authority, and by the belief held by almost all onlookers that they should not interfere with the law being carried out. The perpetrators of mass injustice, including mass murder, are always hugely outnumbered by their victims, and if you add in the number of spectators, all those people who could have intervened, it becomes obvious how significant the actions or inaction of mere spectators can be. Of course, some people will fail to intervene in a situation simply as a result of basic fear. A witness to a mugging who does not dare to intervene is not condoning mugging by his inaction. He simply values the benefit to his own safety that comes from inaction more than he values whatever benefit he thinks he could be to the victim by stepping in. But there are many cases in which the belief in authority makes people hesitate to get involved in a conflict, not just out of fear, but out of deep psychological aversion to going against authority. There are two ways this can cause spectators to stand idly by while legal injustice is inflicted upon someone else. Number one, the spectator can believe that the injustice is actually a good thing because it is the law. Or number two, the spectator can disapprove, but his willingness to actually act out against law enforcers or even to speak out against authority is stifled by his trained-in subservience. Either way, the outcome is the same. The spectator does nothing to stop the injustice, but the two phenomena will be addressed separately. Imagining legal evil to be good. There are literally millions of examples that could be used to demonstrate how the perception of the general public is dramatically affected by the belief in authority. Just consider how the average person views and judges an act when it is committed by one claiming to be authority, as opposed to how he views and judges the exact same act when it is committed by anyone else. Here are a few examples. Okay, so example number one, scenario A. An American soldier in a foreign country is going house to house, kicking in doors, carrying a machine gun, and pointing it at complete strangers, ordering them around and interrogating them while searching for quote-unquote insurgents. Scenario B. An average citizen in his own country is going house to house, kicking in doors, carrying a machine gun, and pointing it at complete strangers, ordering them around and interrogating them while searching for people he doesn't like. The first is viewed by most people to be a brave and noble soldier serving his country, while the latter is viewed as a horribly dangerous, probably mentally disturbed individual who should be disarmed and subdued at all costs. Example number two, scenario A. An officer of the law is manning a sobriety checkpoint or a border checkpoint, stopping everyone to ask if they are in the country legally or if they have had anything to drink, or to otherwise see if any indication or evidence of criminal activity can be found. Scenario B. A man without a badge is stopping every car that drives down his street, asking every driver if he is an American, asking whether he has been drinking, and looking into his car for anything that appears suspicious. The cop who engages in such intrusive, obnoxious harassment, detainment, interrogation, and searching is viewed by many to be A brave law enforcer doing his job, while anyone else behaving that way would be viewed as a psychotic and dangerous person. Example number 3. Scenario A. A quote-unquote child protective services worker receives a case file and, based upon an anonymous tip, shows up at a house to question the homeowners with the stated purpose of deciding whether they are fit parents or whether the state should forcibly take their children away from them. Scenario B. An average person, based upon a rumor he heard from a stranger, shows up at the home of other strangers, asking them questions and threatening to take their children away if the questioner is not satisfied with the answers. Again, the government worker is imagined to be just doing their job, while the average individual who does the same thing is seen as a dangerous, probably mentally unstable person. This is not to say that there could never be a situation in which a child should be taken away from his parents for the child's own protection, but such matters would be taken extremely seriously by any individual who had to take personal responsibility for his actions. A bureaucrat who is merely taking action as a cog in the machine of government, on the other hand, will do such things with far less hesitation and less justification, because he will imagine that something called the law is solely responsible for whatever he does. Example number 4. Scenario A. A pilot in the United States Air Force, having been given orders to do so, flies to the proper coordinates and delivers his payload to the intended target. The result is that some mercenaries of a different authority are killed, along with a number of civilians who happened to be in the area. Scenario B. An American citizen acting on his own loads up a plane with homemade explosives, flies over a building in the city where a vicious street gang is known to reside, and drops the ordnance. The result is that several gang members are killed, as are dozens of innocent bystanders who happened to be passing by on the street. The average American views the civilian casualties from the first scenario as unfortunate, but chalks them up to the hazards of war. The military pilot is viewed as a hero for having served his country and is given a medal. In the latter scenario, however, the average American views the pilot as a lunatic, a terrorist, and a murderer, and demands that he be put in prison for the rest of his life. Whether an act has been formally declared legal by politicians and whether it is being done at the behest of authority has a huge impact on the perceived morality and legitimacy of the act. In a very real sense, those who do the bidding of authority are not even regarded as people, in that their behaviors and actions are judged by such a drastically different standard from those of average human beings. As another example, a lot of people would be alarmed at a report of a man with a gun in their neighborhood, unless they heard that that man also had a badge. People judge behavior based largely upon whether such behavior has been authorized or forbidden by authority rather than whether the behavior was inherently legitimate. When citizens are called into an authoritarian court to serve as jurors in a criminal trial, for example, it is routine for the judge to tell the jury that they are not to concern themselves with whether the accused did anything wrong. They are to decide only whether or not his actions were in accordance with whatever the judge declares the law to be. Of note, those in positions of power have, over the years, deliberately and methodically worn away at an old tradition known as jury nullification, whereby a jury could, in essence, overturn what they viewed as a bad law by returning a verdict of not guilty, even if they believed the accused had actually broken the law. Every jury still has that power, but authoritarian judges do everything they can to keep jurors from realizing it. Even when not on a jury, most people still judge others through authoritarian-colored glasses. Judging the goodness of another based heavily upon whether he obeys the commands of politicians, i.e., whether he is a law-abiding taxpayer, Compare how the average citizen would view the two individuals described below. Individual A has no driver's license, works under the table to avoid paying taxes, never registered for the selective services, owns an unregistered, unlicensed firearm, occasionally smokes pot, sometimes gambles illegally, and lives in a cabin which he owns but for which he has no occupancy permit, and which has a deck on the back that he built without first getting a building permit. Individual B has a driver's license, pays taxes on what he earns, registered for the draft, owns a registered firearm, occasionally drinks beer, sometimes plays the state lottery, and lives in a government-inspected and approved house with the government-inspected and approved deck out back. The two live otherwise similar lives, with both being productive and with neither robbing or assaulting anyone. Their behaviors, choices, and lifestyles are very similar in almost every way, except that there are laws against the actions of individual A, but not against those of individual B. That alone, without any other substantive difference in what they do or how they treat other people, would cause a lot of people to view individual A with a degree of contempt, while viewing individual B with respect and approval. In fact, if individual A was accosted, detained, and even physically assaulted, i.e., tasered or beaten and handcuffed by law enforcers, even if he had never threatened or harmed anyone, many believers in government would opine that he had it coming, that he deserved to be attacked and caged for having disobeyed the commands of politicians. This tendency of onlookers to blame the victims of authoritarian violence is incredibly strong. One who accepts the superstition of authority, the idea that some individuals have the right to forcibly dominate others, and that those others have a duty to comply, will assume that if authority is using violence against a person, it must be justified, and therefore the victim of such violence must have done something wrong. This pattern shows up in different situations. When, for example, U.S. troops kill civilians in some foreign country, many Americans are desperate to believe and therefore automatically assume, without a shred of evidence, that the dead victims must have been insurgents or collaborators, or at least sympathizers with the enemy. As another example, when the Branch Davidians near Waco, Texas were subjected to a military assault, followed by prolonged physical and mental torture, followed by mass extermination, many Americans were quick to assume that anyone that government would do that to must have deserved it. The American tyrants fostered this attitude by fabricating various rumors and accusations in order to demonize the victims of that violent, fascistic assault on nonviolent people. Actually, the incident was the result of a publicity stunt by the ATF, based upon rumors that some people in the group possessed illegal gun parts. Many people assume that if someone was assaulted, prosecuted, or imprisoned by agents of authority, then that person must have done something wrong and must have deserved what was done to him. This assumption may come from a refusal of people to consider the possibility that the government they rely on for protection is actually an aggressor, or it may come from not wanting to consider the possibility that anyone, including himself, could be the next helpless victim of authoritarian violence, even if he has done nothing wrong. Regardless of the cause, the end result is that, when evil is committed in the name of law, many spectators immediately hate the victims and rejoice at the pain and suffering that is inflicted upon them. Obligation to do wrong. While everyone is aware that there are laws against robbery and murder, except when they are committed in the name of authority, the average person is completely unaware of the tens of thousands of pages of other government-issued statutes, rules, and regulations, federal, state, and local. But even when they have very little idea exactly what the law does and does not allow, most people still hold a general belief that obeying the law is a good thing, and that breaking the law is a bad thing, In fact, even when a person is strongly opposed to a particular law, believing it to be unjust, he may still hold a general conflicting belief that laws ought to be obeyed and that it is justified to punish those who disobey. This psychological paradox is quite common, in fact, with many people vehemently lobbying to change what they view to be bad laws, while supporting the idea that as long as it is a law, people should obey it. Such mental contradictions are common in the context of the belief in authority, but are rare outside of it. For example, no one would argue that it is morally wrong to try to steal an old lady's purse, but also morally wrong for the old lady to hang onto her purse. But the concept of a bad law in the mind of one who believes in authority boils down to a similar paradox. A bad command, which is also, a bad command which also is bad to disobey. The spectator who believes in authority may view a particular command enacted by the masters and implemented by the enforcers as being unimportant, unnecessary, counterproductive, or even stupid or unjust, while at the same time believing that people still have a moral obligation to obey that command simply because it is the law. Examples of the effects of such a viewpoint abound, ranging from the mundane to the horrific. Here are a few. Example number 1. At 2 a.m., on a wide-open, straight, empty road running through unpopulated farmland, a driver slows down but does not stop at the stop sign at a cross street. A motorcycle cop, hiding 100 yards away behind some bushes, turns on his lights. Almost everyone, given those facts, would agree that the driver did not harm or endanger anyone or anyone's property, and yet most people would agree that the cop would have the right to demand payment from the driver via a traffic ticket. In other words, even though they would concede that the only thing bad about what the driver did was that it was technically illegal, they believe that that alone justifies the forcible robbery of the driver. Taking it one step further, if the driver attempted to leave the scene rather than accept the ticket, most spectators would agree that the cop would be right to chase down, capture, and imprison the driver, or even kill the driver if the driver doesn't stop. Example number 2. A government inspector from the State Board of Health conducts an inspection of a restaurant. The restaurant is perfectly clean and organized, and the inspector finds no indication that anything there poses any risk to anyone's health. However, he nonetheless finds several technical violations of the local code for restaurants. As a result of those violations, not because they create a danger to anyone, but because they are against the rules, the restaurant owner is fined hundreds of dollars. Again, even though the restaurant owner did not harm or endanger anyone or anyone's property, most people would view it as legitimate for the owner to be robbed by those acting on behalf of government. And if the owner attempted to resist such robbery, whether by trying to conceal the technical violations or bribe the inspector or by refusing to pay the fine, he would be seen as immoral by most people, and the enforcers would be seen as having the right to use whatever means necessary to achieve compliance with the law. Example number 3. A man drives his friend home from a party. Knowing he would have to drive, he did not have any alcohol to drink, though his friend did. He drops his friend off and heads home. He notices the police doing a sobriety checkpoint, traffic stop ahead, and remembers that his friend left his half-full beer bottle in the car. Knowing that it is illegal to have an open container of alcohol in his car, he covers it up. He has not harmed or endangered anyone, and in fact, he has acted quite responsibly, acting as designated driver to make sure his friend would arrive home safely. However, he still broke the law, albeit accidentally, by driving a car with an open bottle of beer in it, and then tried to hide evidence of that fact. If he was caught doing so and arrested, few people would view the cop as the bad guy in the situation. Example number 4. A man sells a shotgun with a barrel 1/4 of an inch shorter than the law allows. The weapon is no more lethal than a shotgun with a quarter of an inch barrel longer, and no one who was involved threatened or used violence against anyone. But the man, having been caught with the illegal item, is subjected to a paramilitary invasion of his property, followed by an armed standoff in which several people are killed. Unfortunately, this example is not hypothetical. It happened to Randy Weaver at the incident at Ruby Ridge in 1992. And he was not merely caught selling an illegal shotgun. He was enticed into doing so by an undercover law enforcer. The result of the armed invasion of the Weaver's property and the subsequent shootout and prolonged siege, earmuffs for little kids, was that Mr. Weaver's wife and son were killed, and he and a friend were wounded. Though it would be absurd for anyone to claim that there is a moral difference between possessing a shotgun with an 18-inch barrel and possessing a shotgun with a 17 3/4-inch barrel. And even though that allegation was the entire legal justification for the armed assault and confrontation, many spectators would still fault Randy Weaver, viewing him as the bad guy for having allowed himself to be coaxed into breaking an arbitrary, completely irrational, and not to mention unconstitutional law. That is the power of the belief in authority. It can lead many people to view a gang of sadistic, murderous thugs as the good guys, and to view their victims as the bad guys. To most people, breaking the law, without specifying which law, has an automatic negative connotation. They view disobedience to authority not merely as dangerous, but as immoral. But to the government believer, something even worse than committing a minor, victimless crime is openly disobeying an agent of authority. The average spectator, when observing the interaction between an authority figure and anyone else, will often view with disdain anyone who does not immediately and unquestioningly answer any questions and comply with any requests from a man with a badge. Even if the person complies but exhibits an attitude toward the authority figure, any attitude other than meek subservience, many spectators will be quick to condemn the one who fails to grovel. And one who runs away from the police, even if he had done nothing wrong in the first place, is viewed with scorn by most. And when someone who runs or hides or refuses to cooperate is beaten up, tortured, or even murdered by law enforcers, many spectators opine that the victim should have done what the police told him to do. And when someone actively resists an authority figure, few have the gumption to take that person's side under any circumstances, even with mere words. Just as a well-trained dog will not bite its master, even when sadistically maltreated, so those who have been trained to bow to authority are usually psychologically incapable of being themselves, of bringing themselves to lift a finger to defend themselves, much less someone else, from any aggression committed in the name of the law, in government, and authority. Indeed, due to their authoritarian indoctrination, most people more eagerly condemn their fellow victims than join together with their fellow victims to actually resist tyranny. There is, of course, a difference between saying that it is not smart for someone to do something and saying that it is immoral to do something. It is one thing to say that it is stupid for someone to mouth off to a cop, and another to say doing so is actually immoral, and that one who does so therefore deserves whatever abuse or punishment he receives. The believers in authority often express the latter opinion about anyone who defies the police, regardless of the reason. The idea of average people imposing justice upon wayward law enforcers existentially terrifies statists, even when a law enforcer has done something as serious as committing murder. In the eyes of the well-indoctrinated, the only civilized course of action in such a situation is to beg some other authority to make things right, but never to take the law into one's own hands. People may complain about and condemn legal injustice, but few are even able to consider the possibility of engaging in premeditated illegal resistance, even when agents of government are inflicting vicious brutality upon unarmed, nonviolent targets. And if, through prolonged brainwashing, a people can be rendered psychologically unable to resist the oppressions done in the name of authority, then it makes no difference whether those people have the physical means to resist. Modern tyrants and their enforcers are always outnumbered and often outgunned by their victims by a factor of hundreds or thousands. Yet tyrants still maintain power, not because people lack the physical ability to resist, but because, as a result of their deeply inculcated belief in authority, they lack the mental ability to resist. As Stephen Biko put it, quote, "The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed," end quote. Double standard on violence. The double standard in the minds of those who have been indoctrinated into authoritarianism when it comes to the use of physical force is enormous. When, for example, a law enforcer is caught on film brutally assaulting an unarmed, innocent person, the talk is usually about whether the officer should be reprimanded, or maybe even lose his job. If, on the other hand, some citizen assaults a police officer, nearly everyone will enthusiastically demand, often without even wondering or asking why the person did it, that the person be caged for many years. And if a person resorts to the use of deadly force against a supposed agent of authority, hardly anyone even bothers to ask why he did it. In their minds, no matter what the agent of authority did, it is never okay to kill a representative of the god called government. To the believers in authority, nothing is worse than a cop killer, regardless of why he did it. In reality, using deadly force against one who pretends to be acting on behalf of authority is morally identical to using deadly force against anyone else. An act of aggression does not become any more legitimate or righteous simply because it is legalized and committed by those claiming to act on behalf of authority. And using whatever force is necessary to stop or prevent an act of aggression, whether the aggression is legal or not, and whether the aggressor is a law enforcer or not, is justified. Of course, the risks involved with resisting legal aggression are often much higher, but that does not make it any less moral or justified. Many of the reasons now used by law enforcers to forcibly take people captive, such as engaging in peaceful public demonstrations without a permit, or photographing law enforcers or government buildings, or not submitting to random stops and questioning by law enforcers, have no shred of justification when viewed without the authority myth. As such, resisting such fascist thuggery, even if it requires deadly force to do so, is morally justified, albeit extremely dangerous. But most people are literally incapable of even considering such an idea. Even when they recognize unjust oppression, they imagine that the civilized response is to let the injustice happen, and then later beg some other authority to make amends. When faced with legal aggression and oppression, there are only two possibilities. Either the people are obliged to allow law enforcers to inflict all manner of injustice and oppression upon them, and then complain later, or the people have the right to use whatever level of force is necessary to stop such injustice and oppression from occurring. To say, for example, that someone has a right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures by government agents, as the Fourth Amendment of the Bill of Rights states, would mean nothing if a victim of such tyranny was obliged to allow it to happen at the time and then complain about it later. To have a right to be free from such oppression logically implies the right to use whatever force is required to stop such oppression from happening in the first place, even if that requires killing a police officer. But the very thought terrifies those who have been trained to always bow to authority. Most of those who speak of unalienable or unalienable rights still balk at the thought of forcibly defending those rights against authoritarian results authoritarian assaults. To say that someone has a right to do something while also saying that he would not be justified in forcibly defending such a right against government incursions is a contradiction. In truth, what most people call rights, they actually perceive as government-granted privileges, which they hope their masters will allow, but which they have no intention of forcibly protecting if such rights are outlawed by government. For example, to have an unalienable or unalienable right to speak one's mind, the right to freedom of speech, means that the person also has the right to use whatever level of violence it takes, up to and including deadly force, to defend against government agents who try to silence him. Though the point makes loyal believers in authority very uncomfortable, the very concept of a person having an unalienable right to do something also implies the right to kill any law enforcers who attempt to stop him from doing it. But in truth, there is almost nothing that government can do, whether it be censorship, assault, kidnapping, torture, or even murder, which would make the average statist advocate violent, illegal resistance. The reader is invited to test the depths of his own loyalty to the myth of authority by considering the question of what would have to happen before he himself would feel justified in killing a law enforcer. Law enforcers constantly escalate disagreements to the level of violence every time they try to arrest someone or force their way into someone's home or forcibly take someone's property, and authoritarian enforcers will then keep increasing the level of violence they use until they get their way. The result is that the people, unless they are willing to engage in open revolution against the entire system, will sooner or later bow to the will of the ruling class or be killed. And though the mercenaries of the state are always using force, or the threat of force, to subdue and subjugate average people, the moment their intended victims respond to violence with violence, most spectators will instantly identify the victim of aggression, the one who used force only to defend against an attack, as the bad guy. This glaring double standard, the idea that it is okay for authority to commit violent acts of aggression on a regular basis, but horribly evil for the common folk to ever respond with defensive violence, shows how drastically the belief in authority can warp people's perception of reality. Ironically, in considering other places and other times, almost everyone accepts and even praises the use of illegal violence, including deadly violence, against agents of government. Few people would still insist that the Jews who lived in 1940 Germany should have continued to try to work within the system by voting and petitioning the Third Reich for justice. Instead, those who illegally hid, ran away, or even forcibly resisted, as occurred in the Warsaw Ghetto, are now seen by almost everyone as having been justified in doing so, even though they were technically criminals, lawbreakers, and even cop killers. But authoritarians, in their own time and in their own country, not only continue to condemn any who illegally try to avoid or resist oppression, but cheerfully gloat over the suffering of such people when they are punished by government. To delight in a tax cheat being punished, for example, as many Americans do, is akin to a slave taking pleasure in the whipping of a fellow slave who tried to escape. There may be an aspect of simple envy in this, a feeling that if one subject has been victimized, it is not quote-unquote fair that another escaped such suffering. This contributes to the fact that taxpayers, i.e. those who have been forcibly extorted by the ruling class, often express resentment of anyone who has avoided being similarly extorted. Oddly, the victims of legal robbery often imagine themselves to be virtuous for having been robbed, and look down on those who, for whatever reason, have not been robbed. The danger of inaction. One who views breaking the law as inherently bad, regardless of what the law is, may be quick to report to the authorities any illegal activities he is aware of, even if the activities are victimless and constitute neither force nor fraud. Likewise, those who sit on juries and government courtrooms, if they imagine disobedience to authority to be inherently immoral, are likely to give their blessing to someone being punished, sometimes quite harshly, for doing something which harmed no one and did not constitute either fraud or violence. In the case of the snitch and the juror, however, such actions take one out of the role of a mere spectator and move him into the role of a collaborator of oppression. The damage done by the belief in authority among the spectators of oppression comes more often from their inaction rather than from their action. Time after time, oppressions, large and small, have been committed right under the noses of basically good people who did nothing about it. To a certain degree, this is the result of simple self-preservation. A person may avoid getting involved simply because he fears for his own safety, but the Milgram experiments showed quite clearly that even without any underlying threat to themselves, most people feel irresistibly compelled to obey authority even when they know that what they are being told to do is wrong and harmful to others. And if they find it difficult to disobey a perceived authority, they will find it even more difficult, if not impossible, to bring themselves to intervene when an authority is exerting its will on someone else. The result of the spectators, having been trained to be passive, obedient, and non-confrontational, can be seen in the many instances throughout the world and throughout history of dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of spectators standing around like zombies, watching the agents of authority assault or even murder innocent people. Even in the United States, the supposed land of the free and home of the brave, videos continue to surface depicting police brutality occurring right in front of crowds of onlookers who simply stand and watch, not lifting a finger to protect their fellow man against the evils committed in the name of authority. Okay, we'll go to the chat now. Next week we'll continue. And we'll begin with the effects of the myth on the advocates. That's going to be an interesting section. So come back next week and tune in for that. Let's go to the chat now, see what's going on over here, if anything. Come on. Something went wrong. All right, we'll try to open up the chat again. Hold on. Here we go. All right. Okay. All right, so we got Who to Thunk It and Fat Cats. Yaten, I don't know. Good evening from Florida. Good evening from Chicago. Good evening from New Hampshire. Oh yeah, so Who to Thunk It is the volunteer, Jonna, my friend. Thank you for all of your help. All right, so I'm just reading the chat. So Who to Thunk It says a local ice cream shop near her just shuttered overnight after the city fined them for having a sign that was too big in the window. The owner of the ice cream store also previously ran for local office and lost. These are the kind of stories that come out of government rule following. And then she says she's got to run. Peace out. Great stuff tonight. Thank you very much. Yeah, and that's a good example of what was covered in the book this evening. It's silly. I wonder if maybe they went after this person for their political their run for office or whatever. These people do this kind of stuff all the time, you know. Anyways, I think I'm just going to probably just going to call it unless somebody wants to drop another comment in the chat, and I'll take a swing at whatever it is you got to say. Otherwise, I kind of want to just like talk about this last little section here, the danger of inaction. It can be really difficult to overcome. It can be really difficult to overcome such fear, right? This overwhelming sense of self-preservation has been deliberately trying to find the right words. It's been deliberately kind of exploited in the minds of many people for generations now. These people, for many generations now, people have been taught that self-preservation is the most important thing. That your life is the most important thing. And the truth is that, you know, this life is finite. And that's what makes it so precious. It's true. Your life is very important. And no one should be able to extinguish the flame of your life. That's just wrong. Murder is wrong. But when we're sitting around and watching objectively wrong things happen, just because you're, you know, just because maybe you're afraid of your own safety. I mean, this is how tyranny is built. That's what makes inaction so dangerous. So we gotta, to the very least, like I'm thinking of all these incidents that we see happen, and you get 20 different angles from people's cell phones of a group of cops, you know, maybe 3 or 4 of them ganging up on one person. And and they're just filming it with their little phones, with their fondle slabs, instead of maybe, I don't know, bum rushing them and getting the cops off of the guy's neck. For instance, you know, George Floyd, for instance, who many believe and have been told through a government-sponsored coroner, through their reports, the coroner report, that George Floyd was heavily under the influence of drugs and that he was dying of a drug overdose and not from a knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 34 seconds. When the fact of the matter is either way, it does not matter. Either way, it's through the negligence of government officials, i.e. the police officers in this instance, that led to his death. So whether it's from the knee on the neck or from the overdose, aren't we made to believe that these are the experts in these situations and that they can identify these things? And if the man is suffering from an overdose, you know, I'm sorry, why are you putting your knee on his neck anyways? There's plenty of you in this situation. They outnumbered this man. And then you get, you know, a bunch of people just standing around, just watching this happen, watching this guy get murdered on the sidewalk or on the curb. And then we see multiple cities across the country have these intense riots and these intense people gathering around and succumbing to groupthink and crowd mentality and causing even more chaos and destruction and even death than was ever needed as a result of one man dying. His death was exploited, and the result is that more statism. It's just the result is more statism. A further justification for the amplification of the ability of the authorities and what they're able to do to the slaves, the people being subjected. And that's the goal, right? This is kind of like a Hegelian dialectic type the goal is to have complete slavery. But you can't just do that tomorrow and be like, well, I mean, you could, but you'd very quickly would the authorities be met with very violent resistance if this tomorrow it was just, bleep, this is it. You're all slaves now. You're not allowed to do anything. No more constitution, no more nothing. Because even though it's just a document, it's still a very powerful document. I mean, it created a religion, for crying out loud. It created the American religion of statism. And whether or not people understand it, they still believe in it. And if the authorities were to attempt to take that away with such just swiftness, it would be noticeable, and people would, I think, violently resist that. Whether or not I am right about that is neither here nor there. So they do it in small little increments, and they use the modern interpretation of a Hegelian dialectic of problem, reaction, solution tactic in order to justify and gain the consent of people in the country to further their goals of complete slavery. And so, yeah, narratives get exploited all the time by these people in authority, and we have to have our guard up. We have to make sure that we're thinking critically, we're asking questions and demanding answers. Never stop asking. That's some advice that one of my mentors gave me is never stop asking questions, never stop demanding answers. And so that's what we got to do in these situations. Going around and getting into a group, getting into a crowd is a pretty dangerous thing to do. Now, it's not to say that you can't find some sort of peace and solace in a community, and that gathering around with like-minded folk is a bad thing. I think that it's actually good to do that, but in such a heightened, stressful situation, being in a crowd can turn disastrous very quickly. And they know that, which is why time and time again, we have seen stories and the narrative has shifted and the truth has been revealed that there were agent provocateurs in the crowds. Such as January 6th, for instance, it's been revealed, even though, albeit by the authorities themselves, and I take everything they say with a grain of salt, but there's a narrative being crafted and has been crafted ever since that day of January 6th, 2021, that there could have been, or that there were indeed FBI agents in the crowd acting as agent provocateurs, egging on the already heightened stressful situation of these statists and their government beliefs of their preferred ruler not being elected or selected again. Same as it was with the summer of 2020 and the riots in Minneapolis, and so riots in Minneapolis, same as riots in DC. It's all the same in the end. These things are being used to justify the implementation and the increased severity of what authority is allowed to do to us, little people. And that's the end game. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that I guess I just want people to know that. Now, as far as all of the talk about, taxation and everything in this book, keep in mind that the author himself got into some hot water when it came to his non-compliance with taxation. And he has a lot of experience in this realm of fighting against the authorities when it comes to taxation. Taxation is not just merely theft or robbery. Taxation is slavery. And this author, Larken Rose, is the example that we can learn from to back up my claim of it being slavery. If you do not pay your taxes and they find out, they will put you in a cage. Or they will steal your property from you. They will make your life a living hell. But if many people do it in a concentrated area with the intended goal and purpose to resist these thugs, how easy can they really come and do anything about it when we outnumber them? It's easy to pick off one person in a crowd, stick out like a sore thumb, when their neighbors will sit there and not do anything to stop it. And that's a lot of what he's talking about in this book. The dangers of inaction, like as this episode is titled, and about the abuses from the IRS and the federal government when it comes to taxation, that are the abuses that are suffered by people that choose not to comply with this from a moral standpoint or just a financial standpoint, never mind a moral one. Some people might not be able to have any quality of life because of taxation. They might disagree with it from a religious standpoint. Might not even be from an objective moral standpoint. It could just be from some weird religious one. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What matters is the understanding that the government and the IRS are claiming ownership over you and your property and the production of your labor when they claim that some of that is owed to them. And if you don't like it, they will come and take it. They will take what you have bought, such as a house or a car or anything else, and they will not stop. Up to including putting you into a cage. And if you resist that, they will kill you because you didn't hand over a portion of your earned wages, which is your property, because it was created with your money. Your money was created, it was created by the Federal Reserve, but you're producing that. Whatever you're producing is with your body, which is your property. And the results of the production of your labor belong to you and not anyone else. So that's why I always tell people that taxation is slavery, because a very, very small group of people who are considered authority can gather around in their little, in their little buildings, and they can decide whether it's with or without your consent. They can decide what percentage of what you own is owed to them. And then they can use it for whatever they want after they've acquired your property from you through threat of violence. So yeah, slavery it is. And I don't know about you guys out there, but last I checked, slavery is wrong. So never mind whether or not you approve or disapprove of what is being bought with the tax money. Never mind about any of that. Just understand that if you ever tried to say no for whatever reason, well, that's not really an option in their eyes. So be ready. And the more of us there are, the better. So as we speak, they're still dropping bombs. They're it's big business to them. War is big business to them. So that's going to be it for me tonight. Okay, so tune in next week, same time, same place. Go to voluntaryistacademy.com. And when you go over there, you can sign up to the newsletter, do all that great stuff. When you sign up to the newsletter, you'll be able to stay in touch throughout the week. You'll be able to see what I'm listening to when I'm going around and doing my job throughout the week. I listen to podcasts, and every now and then I read a news article. I like to keep up with things that are going on around the world from people who I trust, whose work, has shown to be trustworthy. Those over at antiwar.com. They post really good stuff. My friend Etienne de la Buissy Squared, he posts good stuff over at the Art of Liberty Foundation. Some of it's a little out there, but I really love that guy, and he's a really good friend. So I like to go over and read his stuff. And then Unlimited Hangout is good. That's always a good one. I really suggest people sign up to the newsletter. I include nice memes and everything in there, and all sorts of good stuff in there. So sign up to the newsletter. It's completely free, and you get to stay in touch with me in case this channel ever goes the way of the dodo, as I like to say sometimes. If this channel gets nuked, you can be over at the Rumble channel, and you can sign up to the newsletter to stay in touch and to know what's going on. And so sign up to that. Consider going over to Rumble. There's a channel over there just as a backup channel. And thanks again, Jonna, for making sure that channel is kept up with and that the uploads are happening to the website. I really appreciate what you do. And yeah, I mean, I know times are tough for just about damn near everybody. But if you want to help this project a little bit more, you can become a sponsor. And you can do that for $3 a month. And you get access to a Discord server. And we'll have private meetings where we can discuss solutions. And we can have a solutions-based approach to all the turmoil and troubles of the world. And we can connect with one another because, let's face it, connection with people that understand, it's really important. It's very, very important. So, no one should have to feel alone. If you already don't feel alone, that's great. I love that for you. And keep on trucking. And maybe we can get something going anyways. So you come over here and do that, and we can have little meetings every now and then and have fun. So I appreciate everybody's attendance and listenership. And I'll see you guys next week. Peace.
No masters, no slaves, no